Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this live stream. I'm going to get started in just a couple seconds here. I'm going to make sure that all the tech is working. Just so you know, we're doing this on YouTube Live, so feel free to share the link with anybody you know who might be interested in the event. They can just find it through the same link that you're viewing it on. No need to register for the event. We're trying this out for the first time, so really hoping that this goes well. If you think it is going well, please feel free to let us know. You can submit a comment or a question in the chat at any time throughout the event, so we really encourage you to do that. My name is Lucas Fraser. I'm the president of CEP Ottawa, and I'll be your host for this evening. It's going to be a really interesting event. We've got an awesome guest who I'm really excited for you to meet, and this should just be a lot of fun. It's our first time trying this, so if you have any suggestions, any recommendations, any feedback, please let us know. We want to continue to do these things if they're adding value and if they're helpful to you. So without any further ado, the agenda for tonight, we're going to do a 1-hour webinar streamed on YouTube Live with Erik Palvin, the office manager of Ecology Ottawa. The first couple minutes, I'm just going to introduce him and talk about a bit of an activity that we have going on at CEP Ottawa. And then Erik's going to take it away and talk about his work and talk about the style of organizing, engagement organizing, and driving real change at Ecology Ottawa. Most of you have probably heard of and kept up with Ecology Ottawa if you're involved with our community, and you'll know that they're just a really impressive organization. And I think we could all take a lot of lessons and learnings from what they do and apply it to our own work. From there, we're going to move into a one-on-one Q&A between myself and Erik, where we get into a bit more of the details of what he's talking about. And then finally, we're going to move on to the audience Q&A. So again, please, if you've just joined, feel free to drop a comment or question for Erik in the chat to the right of your video stream, and we'll answer that question. And Kartik, our wonderful moderator from CEP Ottawa, will ask that question to Erik when the time comes. So one of the things that we've been working on at CEP Ottawa is a survey to ask people what they think and how their lives have changed since the advent of COVID-19, since the lockdown has been spreading. And so Kartik will be sharing a link in the chat right now, or in the next couple of minutes, to this survey. If you are an environmental professional, if you are a member of our community, please do fill out the survey if you haven't already. We're exploring how people's lives have changed and what they're hoping that we can do to help them through this time and to continue to engage them. So far, we've had nearly 50 responses, and people seem to be interested in more interactive speaker sessions and digital interactions. This is definitely something that we're going to be working on for the next iterations of this virtual speaker series. So stay tuned for that and keep up to date with our email, follow us on YouTube, everything like that. There's also some interest in some mentorship opportunities, which is something that CEP Vancouver has done very well, which we'll be looking into as well. So thanks for those survey responses. We're going to be taking that feedback into account, so please be sure to fill that out. Next thing is, my name is Lucas Fraser. I'm head of CEP Ottawa. We're a nonprofit group in Ottawa that is aiming to, we have chapters across Canada, and we really want to bring together people who work in, with, and for the environment in this great city. We work with our chapters across the country, but our work is really focused on Ottawa, creating change in Ottawa and bringing in speakers who really know this local community and this local space and getting their feedback and their input to that process. So really happy that you're here and being a part of this. Next, I'll introduce Ecology Ottawa. So our wonderful speaker, Erik Palvin, works for Ecology Ottawa. They're a nonprofit, grassroots, and volunteer-driven organization in Ottawa. And I love this description. They believe that Ottawa residents are concerned about issues such as climate change, pollution, and waste, and that they want sustainable communities where clean energy, air, water, public transit, and active transportation and green space protection take priority. I think that's absolutely true. If you're listening to this, then you probably completely agree with that. They provide residents with the information and tools they need to understand local environmental issues and promote environmental leadership at all levels impacting the city of Ottawa. And what's really interesting about this is that they use the format of engagement organizing, which is what we're learning about tonight, which is really beyond community organizing. They take it a step further by leveraging digital communications and big data and engaging with modern technology to actually drive and measure real results as much as possible. And I think they do a really good job. So on to that, our speaker for tonight, talking about engagement organizing and talking about driving real change with Ecology Ottawa as the example, is Erik Palvin. His title is the office manager, but as you'll see, he's much more than that. And especially now, as everybody's working from home, he's much more than the office manager. He's moved by his love for adventure. Although breathtaking landscapes and urban exploration both serve as outlets for this passion, he envisions a future where these two worlds are more radically integrated. I absolutely love that description. He found his voice for sustainability organizing and driving real organizational change as the chair of the MEC Ottawa's Environmental Integrity Committee. And he is now working at Ecology Ottawa and doing a fantastic job. So without further ado, I encourage you to ask questions throughout, and I welcome our speaker, Erik Palvin. Erik, you ready to take over here?
Hello.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to mute myself and let you get right into it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, I appreciate the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to be here to speak at CEP Ottawa. Everything Lucas has told me about the work that CEP Ottawa does and CEP generally does, it's a great network. So I'm honored to be able to help with this flagship kind of YouTube live stream. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Hopefully you can see me okay. And please do submit comments throughout. I'd also just kind of like to start with a question for the audience. So feel free to add a comment, just talking about what brought you in tonight. What is it you're hoping to get out of the webinar? You know, we have a lot of time to talk near the end, sort of in the second half. So I'm more than happy to try to tailor the information to the different audience members. I really think that talking about engagement organizing, one of the most important things you really got to start with is you have to think about your story. What brought you here today? And what is it that you're trying to change? And why do you care? Why should other people care? So engagement organizing isn't just about trying to get a better policy in place. Of course, that's a measure of success, but it's about inspiring people. So I'd like to start by just telling you the story of Ecology Ottawa. Some of you may already know us quite well. For others, we might be a new face to you. So Ecology Ottawa was founded in around 2006. And we were founded by a group of environmentalists and people working in international development in different levels of government, a lot of people working at a very high level. And they were all sort of interested in policy and environmental policy in particular. And what kind of united this group was a growing sense of disillusionment, a kind of cynicism almost breeding, because they felt that this kind of top-down approach that they had all been practicing to address climate change through things like international treaty agreements and national greenhouse gas emissions targets, it wasn't really addressing the problem at the scale and the speed that the science required. So there was kind of a missed opportunity there. And they started getting together and talking about what more can we do? And they thought that instead of always working from the top down, they would start an organization that worked from the bottom up. And I like to say that by coming from the top and the bottom, you can meet in the middle in half the time. So it wasn't that one method is necessarily better than the other, but you need both in order to really make change. So we need people at the high level to be, interested in trying to work out all the logistics and the details, but we need to have the political will by creating a strong grassroots movement so that people at the bottom are demanding that change as well. So they thought, how do we do this? What does it look like? And they all lived in Ottawa. It's the national capital. It's a great place for nonprofits. They decided to create a nonprofit that was really focused on City Hall, on local issues, the municipal government. And they did this for a few reasons. Obviously, it's convenient. It's close by. It's easy to access. But it's also deeply strategic. And I think that's one of the things I want to leave with everyone is that there's a surprising amount of power that the municipal government has to change the way we live our lives. They shape our city. They shape the place that most Canadians live. And in the future, even more Canadians are going to live in cities. And we see that trend developing in other countries as well. So they had the growing sense that in order to really get climate change right, to start addressing it radically, we had to get cities right. So they knew it had to be a local organization. And they knew that focusing on municipal policy was important because it actually can completely change our lives. And so they started attending council meetings, just going to City Hall and watching what councillors did. And then they would start reporting on it and just writing little articles. And this was working well for a time, but they thought, how do we really scale this up? How do we go beyond just kind of watching councillors closely? And how do we actually start making bigger change? How do we get more people involved? And they were inspired by a couple key dates. One was President Barack Obama's presidential campaign. He wasn't president then, but his 2008 campaign was really inspirational. And then also in 2009, the Copenhagen Accord was really a pivotal date. They felt that at that moment, broadly speaking, that meeting is viewed as a bit of a failure in the environmental movement. It had so much promise and it radically underdelivered. So they wanted to try to really make a difference, and that inspired them. And they got their method by looking to Obama's presidential campaign and using these practices called engagement organizing. If you're interested in a name, Marshall Gantz is a professor at Harvard, and he actually helped with Obama's campaign. And I'm happy to share some links and to share his name in the comments below. And as Lucas kind of alluded to, some of the unique attributes of engagement organizing are it's combining traditional community organizing practices with big data and a systematic and strategic collection of data, and then being able to leverage that. So if you kind of fast forward 10 years, we started applying these engagement organizing practices, and we grew an increasingly large network to the point where we had different campaigns all happening simultaneously, tons of little nodes of Ecology Ottawa support. And we're really growing into a substantial organization, the largest environmental organization dealing with local issues in Ottawa. And if I were to sort of break down how we actually make change, given this context, given this background, I really think we can talk about 3 steps. The first is, I like to say, find your friends, right? And I don't just mean people that you like, of course, find them too, because they might want to help you. But I mean people who share basic values, right? Like Lucas mentioned at the outset, people who believe that having clean water is important, people who think that the climate is an important issue, that they're concerned about the future of the planet. But even at a more fundamental level, people who just want to have clean air. Like there's hundreds of thousands of people in Ottawa who probably share those basic values. So your first step is to find them. And then we want to try to build a community. So we want to deepen our relationships with them. And this is where the data really comes in. We want to try to actually get to know these people, and when you have tens of thousands of people, or 100,000 people in our case, in your database, which is 10% of Ottawa's population, it's difficult. Like, how do you have a meaningful conversation with 100,000 people? It's not easy, but you can do it. And so you want to continue that conversation and really deepen that relationship. Where that brings you to is, hopefully, if you've done steps 1 and 2 well, then you have a network and you have a community of people who care about the environment. And a lot of environmental nonprofits are content with that. And that's amazing, because building a community is so valuable and we need more of it. And in some cases that can make change, right? Like if our goal is to change environmental policy, having a community of people that share values, makes that happen to some extent, but it doesn't guarantee it. So we want to go one step further, and we want to actually take that community that we've built, this network of people that know us and know each other, and we want to ask them to do things. And by that, I mean leverage that network, harness that people power, have our voices heard together, and ask people in our community to attend a rally or to sign a petition or to just call their counselor and tell them how much this matters to them. Any kind of action like that is really, really important. And that's how you make change at the grassroots level. That's how you motivate politicians to vote one way or another, is by getting enough people in their ridings or in their wards to communicate what they want, to demand the kind of leadership they hope to see at City Hall. And so that kind of like that third piece is so critical. And that's kind of what tends to make organizations like Ecology Ottawa and those similar to us a little bit different than most charities, is we have that advocacy component. And when we're at our best, we're able to really strategically leverage our network and connect the right groups to the right people at the right times to take advantage of a policy window that's opening and really demand that we can move the needle in the right direction. So what we've talked about so far is a little bit of Ecology Ottawa's history, like why we exist. Talked a little bit about how we do what we do. And I think you're starting to understand, hopefully, why like the term organizing is so critical. What I'd like to talk about now, in just a few minutes remaining in this kind of like first section of our time today, is the Council Watch program. So this is one of our various campaigns. It's one that I'm leading, and it's really a great example of how engagement organizing works and how we can, make a difference and integrate this into the work that we do. So Council Watch is different than a lot of other campaigns. You may follow other advocacy organizations, other charities who, have a targeted campaign with a specific goal, and they want to stop this pipeline, let's say, or reverse this law, or amend this, increase funding for that. Council Watch is a bit different. What it does is it applies consistent political pressure on politicians by holding them accountable to the promises they make and kind of being loud about the actions they take, especially when they're contradicting themselves or doing things that's other than the promises they make. And you might be wondering, why is this important? Like, we have journalists who are doing this, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right. But in Ottawa, it's a little different. Because Ottawa is the national capital, there's a bit of a lack of attention on City Hall. And we really felt, especially in 2007 and 8 and 9 and 10, that there was really good reason to be paying closer attention. A lot of councillors were able to say one thing and do another. And we wanted to report on that. So what is Council Watch in a nutshell? I mean, it's a strategic and systematic attendance of council and committee meetings. So we pick the meetings that matter and we write detailed notes on them. And then we write these up in a report or publish a table or a diagram, whatever kind of fits the content. And we put that out into the community so that people can actually keep up with what's going on at City Hall. And I can tell you, in my experience, trying to figure out what's going on, even as somebody whose full-time job is focused on City Hall, it's difficult. It takes a lot of time to kind of parse that out. So offering a program like Council Watch is really helpful. Probably the most important thing to emphasize there is it's entirely volunteer driven. And this is where we can kind of come back to why engagement organizing is so powerful, is it really puts a lot of independence and responsibility on volunteers. And so my goal as somebody who's leading Council Watch actually isn't to go to all the meetings. I'm really doing my job when I increase the capacity of the individual volunteers so that they have the confidence and the competence to attend meetings themselves and write their own reports. And that's why I opened my blurb for this event with a quote. Sorry, not my speaking portion. I mean the event description opened with a quote from Saul Alinsky, who's a great community organizer. And that's the quote I'm going to leave you with now, which is, never do for someone else what they can do for themselves. And when we're talking about engagement organizing, and when we want to be able to really make change at a high level and have it scale up, we ultimately need to be developing capacity in individuals and promoting leadership. And by doing that, and by giving people the tools to help themselves, and then moving on, and encouraging them to champion their own causes, we can really spread all of this experience and knowledge and contribute to a healthy, vibrant community that really cares, and make Ottawa the green capital of Canada. So thanks. I'm really happy to continue talking. I'm looking forward to having the Q&A next. And please, any questions about anything I've said, or anything I maybe went too fast through, please post them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Erik. I think that's, it's a really interesting and clearly authentic take on the work that you're doing and the power of it. So thanks for sharing all that. Really, really interesting so far. Before diving into questions, of which I have many, about the actual content, I'll say two things. One, audience, I already saw some comments in there. Please continue to share your thoughts and comments and questions for Erik, because we will be getting to those soon. And then I want to take a step back and ask you some personal questions, because clearly you have a real passion for this work, and you seem to have a lot of deep interest for it. So how did you personally get into this type of work, and how did you end up in Ecology Ottawa?
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. No, it's a great question. Something I didn't do today, which I normally do, is start with that story, actually. The more you get to know me and Ecology Ottawa, the more you'll know we love stories. Every opportunity we have to tell a story is an opportunity that we will not pass up. And it's not just because we think stories are entertaining, but because narrative is important, and that by actually communicating things in a narrative way, it helps make it important to the listener. And it's about that again and trying to like inspire. So hopefully I've managed to achieve some of that. But to your question, really, I remember a time I was 8 years old and camping in an area called Temagami, which is kind of like northern Ontario. Not that far north, but more north than where I grew up, which is Toronto. And there was this a summer camp that I went to, and it was a lot of canoe camping, and we would spend a month just kind of like on islands paddling around. And there was a morning I woke up really early before anybody else was up, and that dew that settles on the little lakes was sort of breathtaking, and it was sunrise, and I was, like I said, 8, I think, maybe 9, and so quite young and don't normally wake up that early. And there was just this silence. And it was in that moment that I kind of just looked around and really appreciated the environment I was in. I was like, this is beautiful.
Up first time.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just beautiful. And we continued our trip. Everything went well. And a few weeks later, I'm back home in like downtown Toronto. And that drive back home was so memorable, because I just remember, I don't know, for those of you who have driven around Toronto on the highways like the 401 and the Don Valley Parkway, it's a lot of, I mean, Don Valley's got some green, but it's mostly gray, right? It's a lot of concrete. And I just had this feeling of like, it's not beautiful. It's not the same, right? And that stuck with me. So for years, I wanted to understand, why do we make our cities this way? Like, this is where we live. Why isn't it beautiful? Why isn't it some place that inspires us? And that really led into a lot of questions. And I ended up getting like, why do humans behave the way they do? And wanted to study psychology and think about why do we make the choices we make? And I ended up kind of getting more into biology from psychology, and then into ecology, and started going out into the field and collecting data and working as like a technician in a research lab at Carleton. And as I started to come back into nature, as like, in university, I was like really motivated to continue pursuing this question of the environment. And at the same time, I started to study more human history to try to get to that answer of like, why do we do what we do? And ultimately, I was reading a lot of political theory and political science and trying to like look at it from that angle. And by the time I was finishing my bachelor's degree, I recognized that it was very important that I try to work on improving our cities because it's where I lived, it's where I grew up, it's all I knew. But I felt fundamentally that that issue had to be a political one. And I knew that what the issue was is how do we live in cities and not harm the environment unnecessarily? Like how do we kind of like harmonize those two things? They seemed at odds, and they still do sometimes. And so Ecology Ottawa, when I found it, it was exactly that. I mean, it's a local organization, which is great, working on municipal policy, trying to make cities better. So it was really just like a perfect fit.
Wow. It's a really, it's a truly kind of inspirational backstory. I think what's interesting about it is that if you really talk to anybody who works actively in environmental or sustainability related work, they have that kind of origin story moment of that when they realize that this mattered both
Yeah.
in general and to them specifically. And it strikes that passion. So it's really interesting to hear that story. And I love that connection with storytelling as a way to drive change and as a way to kind of empower people and inspire people. That's really interesting. And now I'm going to get into kind of, there is always a lot of passion, a lot of drive behind it. And you feel like this work is important, but like so many people know, when you're working on issues like this, there are those moments where you just run into a wall, whether it's somebody who's stubborn or a system that has too much red tape. What are some of these most challenging moments in your work?
Yeah. I mean, the easy answer is just the classic nonprofit cop out of not enough funding, right? Like we're so understaffed. But I feel like that's kind of goes without saying. I think the challenge is, and this comes up often, is reaching the people who like reaching the uninitiated. Reaching outside of your bubble. How do we make sure that we're still talking to all those people and in order to make change, like as I sort of said, but it's worth reiterating, like we measure success when a policy is changed. Like that's what we want to do. That's a win, as it were. And it's never going to happen by talking to like the 30,000 people or whatever who read our emails, in a city of 1 million. Like, I mean, if every single one of them did exactly what we asked them to, that would make a difference for sure. But we need to,
No more cars downtown.
Sorry?
There'll be no more cars downtown.
Well, yeah, exactly. But it's not that easy. So yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is keeping our folks engaged, keeping the key supporters like really psyched and really engaged. But at the same time, always trying to reach new people. And this is something that we have a bit of a solution for, and I'd love to share it really briefly because I didn't touch on it during my kind of background. Is we really prioritize face-to-face, in-person engagement. So when I talked about how we scaled up our work over the years from like 2008, 2009 up until today, the way we did that is we went into communities that we chose strategically based on who we knew lived there, political climate, how people voted. And we knocked on every single door in that community. So kind of like a political organization, right? Like going knocking on doors saying, hey, have you heard about the thing? We would go in there and say, hey, we're Ecology Ottawa. Did you know that the mayor did this? Did you know the councilor's doing this? Did you know they want to build a pipeline here or whatever. And so we ended up meeting everybody in the neighborhood. And that gives us our kind of different flavor too, is we're not just speaking to the left-leaning environmentalists or the progressives, the people who already are going to care, but we hit every single house and we talk to everybody and we get the door slammed on us sometimes, often, unfortunately. We get people who want to like give us money and they love what we're doing, and you get everything in between. So that's something that has been great as a way to get outside of that bubble, but it's still always a challenge with any political movement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whenever people are working in work like this, there's always that preaching to the choir situation, which happens.
Yeah.
And this has come up at several of our events in the past where, we have a similar crowd coming to all of our events and talking about the same things and asking the same questions without maybe some of the representation of the biggest polluters, for example, or the real decision makers. So I think that is something that makes it very interesting, is that you engage much more of the community, the entire community, and you're there at the council meetings with more than just the environmentally minded councillors, but listening to and engaging with all of them. So I think it's really fantastic. And hopefully we'll continue to spread your reach and keep growing beyond that 10% of our population, which is already very impressive. To flip that question around, and I think you've already begun to touch on this, but what are some of the most inspiring and exciting parts of your job, the parts that you love the most?
It has to be the volunteers. I mean, the people that I meet, like it blows me away, the commitment that some of these people put. It's like, I know I'm putting in long hours, it's my full-time job, but like it's my job. Like I'm able to make a living doing this work. And there are some people who are working harder than me sometimes, and they're, in some cases they have another job too. Sometimes they're retired and they have lots of time, but a lot of the time it's these amazing people that come out and just put in so much effort, and it's so inspirational. It's what keeps me going. It keeps me wanting to work harder, because I look, at like these high school students, for example, or these older citizens who have, they both have their own challenges. Like high school students are like, they live, some of them live so far away, and they like take public transit for 90 minutes or something. I mean, not right now, of course, but they would have been doing that every day, all summer, to get their hours and just to help out. And then when their hours finish, they just keep doing it. And, it's great. And the people who still are volunteering a ton now, right? Like in this difficult time, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. On a quick note, I'd like to shout out to my team, who is also doing this all volunteer and for free, and everybody who volunteers with CEP Ottawa. It's fantastic. It's always impressive to see people engaged on these issues just from the goodness of their heart and the desire to meet like-minded people. Nice, I love that. Yeah, so to bring this back a little bit more towards Ecology Ottawa and the work that you do, kind of the elephant in the room question, how has everything changed in the last couple of months since the lockdown has come into place, and how has your work evolved, seeing as you like to be so involved in person?
Yeah, I mean, everything's changed completely. Disclaimer, like we've adapted really well. So I'm not, like we've managed to find ways to make it work, but I can't tell you how strange it is to be like inside in the summer. It's very weird for the organization. We really want to be knocking on doors. It's like what we do. It's in our DNA. So unfortunately, there's this like ever lingering, I don't even know what to put my finger on it. It's like, feels like something's wrong almost, like I look out and I'm like, we should be there. That said, sorry, as you say, that said, that we have adapted quite well. But that problem of escaping the bubble, like knocking on doors is our solution. So now that we can't do that, there is a serious concern about like long-term effects, sorry. Like, if we can miss a season or two of outreach, it's not a problem. We can do lots of digital stuff, but at a certain point, you do need to like really just go talk to brand new people. And it can be difficult to do that in an entirely digital world.
Yeah, especially with the, in social media, if that's how you're choosing to reach out, there's often an echo chamber where you just won't have a chance of getting in to some people's feeds. So yeah, that's certainly a big challenge, but hopefully, it'll bring new innovations and new opportunities with it. And, we're all gonna have to adjust a little bit to this way of life, or a lot in some cases.
Yeah.
So yeah, did you have?
I just had an idea actually that I've been meaning to bounce off people. So I'd love to hear feedback if everybody has it. But we've been playing with this idea of going to all of our supporters and asking them, hey, can you go find 3 friends? And don't just pick your 3 best friends. Don't pick 3 people that love us. But pick 3 people, one who's a follower, one who like, maybe kind of likes us, and one person who's sort of maybe won't be on board right away. Like maybe isn't like would never call themselves an environmentalist, but like cares about trees maybe, but like doesn't think of themselves as like part of that group.
Yeah.
And just like
Well,
say,
they
go
really
find
enjoy
people.
outdoor activities or something like that, and they
Yeah, yeah.
it's the ecosystem services, but maybe don't necessarily connect it.
Yeah, or like maybe a hunter or somebody, right? Like there's so many people who care about, or farmers, anybody who cares about the land, really. Whatever their identity is. And just say like, go find 3 people and talk to them about us,
Yeah.
and get them to sign up to our mailing list or something, like those are some tools we can use. But it's less in our control than knocking on doors would be, right?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting idea. Everybody listening in the audience, consider it. Maybe that's your action point for today's event, is to go and do that. So 2 more questions now before we move on to the audience Q&A, because I am seeing some questions. So one is about Council Watch. You talked a lot about it. It seems like it's both core to Ecology Ottawa and probably core to a lot of the environmental successes that have come through City Hall, I would imagine. What have been your biggest successes or most rewarding moments from that program specifically?
That's a great question. I think a little more detail is warranted on the story, because if you look on our records, like on our publications, you'll see that like there's a bit of a inconsistent publishing around Council Watch, and that's partly because the program has changed so much over the years, and that sometimes it's a much more formal program, like it is kind of becoming again, where we have like a team of people who are council watchers, and they're have a calendar, and they're putting out reports at some kind of regular interval. But at other times, it's been a lot more like the way we do our work is by watching council and then using that to inform our strategy. So in that sense, really, all of our successes over the last 10 years are due to like the Council Watch program, which has been integrated and woven into every campaign. Every campaign starts with watching council and seeing something they do we disagree with, and it always ends with bringing what we do to council and asking them to change it. So some of our successes, I mean, we have a page on our site. You can go to ecologyottawa.ca. We have a French site too as well for the francophones. It's just Ecology Ottawa with IE instead of Y at the end of ecology. And we have a page called Our Successes. So instead of like describing all of them, like please go look at them there. But the most recent one, which could be really interesting, is we helped get the city to declare a climate emergency in 2019. It didn't have the teeth we wanted. So unfortunately, the motion came out a little lackluster, and there's only so much we could do. But the fact that the city did that actually was a big deal for Ottawa. Other cities did it much more readily. So we were still really excited about that. Some other things that we've done, like our first big win, was actually around like the wastewater treatment in Ottawa. And this is sort of before my time. But we did this huge campaign to get the city to deal with what happens when we get lots of rain and we have all the sewers overflow into the river. And so they ended up creating like another, unfortunately, I don't know the technical term for it, but a large reservoir essentially to kind of capture the overflow. And before that, it was just going right into the river, which was, seems kind of crazy in 2010, right? To think about that. But that was the case. And there was also a pipeline, the Energy East pipeline, which was a huge campaign in 2015 that we got like national coverage on that and ended up getting it canceled. So it didn't, it was going to pass over the Ottawa River kind of upstream of us. Again, unfortunately, I wasn't an organizer in that campaign, but we have a lot more info on the site. So, I mean, those are just a couple big wins over the years.
Yeah, and both big deal, or all 3 of those being, pretty significant. And I think probably everybody watching and most of our community saw that announcement of climate emergency. It's one of those things that kind of transcends the environmental bubble when something like that happens, as with these others. So yeah, really impressive. So we're going to move on to the audience questions after one more. So reminder, if you have any questions, drop them in there now. The final question for you, Erik, before going to the audience is, what would be the best way for our audience members to get involved with Ecology Ottawa?
It's a great question. Yeah, well, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you to do something, right? Yeah. So volunteer, come out. That's the best way to learn about what's going on. If you don't have the time, of course, we understand. You can always donate to help support the organization because some people have more treasure than they have time. But if neither of those options are really good for you, just sign a petition, read about them, come out to an event, just check it out, see if there's something that really excites you. If you're keen, sign every single petition, become a volunteer and donate $100 and you'll be a star. It would be great. Really anything you can do. Sorry, I'm shaking the computer. Really anything you can do is great. And if you don't want to be involved directly with Ecology Ottawa, we also understand that. But learn about the issues. At the very least, come to our site so that you can read about what's going on in your city and you can be informed. And like that alone is a huge, huge step.
Wonderful answer. Take that advice. And now I'll invite Kartik, our moderator, who's been watching the feed like a hawk, to come in and ask some of these audience questions. Kartik?
Hi there, good evening. A very engaging talk. I really have to thank you for taking time out to interact with us. Really got to understand more about you as a person and also about Ecology Ottawa as well. Let's get into the questions. We've had quite a few from the audience over here. We have Julian Wu, who says, great talk, thank you. Any other effective grassroots advocacy organizations in Ottawa that you can identify?
Sorry, the first part was just any other advocacy organizations?
Yeah, grassroots advocacy organizations in Ottawa, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it probably the best way to narrow it down would be by issue or by subject matter. So Ecology Ottawa is the largest like environmentally focused local advocacy group. But if you're interested in issues like equity in transit and affordable transit, then there's a couple groups like the Healthy Transportation Coalition. Their founder is actually a co-founder for Ecology Ottawa, so we're connected in that way. It's run by a man named Trevor Hache. Also, the Ottawa Transit Riders is a great group. Also, even like Bike Ottawa is a good group on like active transportation on cycling issues. If you're interested in affordable housing, Acorn, of course. If you haven't heard of it, it's like the nut. ACORN is another amazing group. Really, there's too many to list, but maybe we could have a conversation afterwards to follow up on that, because it really sort of depends on what you want to work on.
Yes. Do you have anything specific to which of these organizations do you think have the best practices of the Lord, in your opinion?
Sorry, which kind of practices?
Best practices in grassroots advocacy. So of the organizations that you talked about, including yours, Ecology Ottawa, do you know of any one or two of them where you've seen that there have been where best practices are being followed?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, all the groups that I just named are absolutely amazing. Any limitation in their success is due entirely just to a lack of resources. If they had more people involved or more staff, permanent funding, I can't even imagine. Like Ottawa would be a completely amazing, different city. But all those groups are doing great things, and I really can't say like which one's sort of the best or anything, because again, the issues are specific to the groups, and the theory of change, which is what we're talking about, like how do we make change, it's going to be somewhat unique to the specific issue. So it is difficult to say, but any group that I've mentioned, any group I mention from here on out, you can assume they're all using really some of the best practices.
All right, thank you so much for that. Yeah. Sorry, did you have something else to say?
I just saying, as far as I know the organizations, I've seen just really good practices.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for that. We have our next question comes from Pallavi Roy, who asks, what is Ecology Ottawa's perspective on green spaces and access to them for the public during the pandemic?
Oh, it's a great question. I mean, that relates directly to our campaign called Safe Streets, Healthy Streets. It also relates to our sort of green space protection campaign more broadly. So kind of I can break that into a two-parter. Regarding green spaces generally, yeah, we've had a long-standing campaign advocating for more green space in the city, and to protect what we already have. So that sort of goes without saying. In terms of the pandemic context, we were actually a pretty big part of working with some other organizations to get some spaces closed to cars, I should say, within the city in order to allow people to access the outdoors in a safe and healthy way during the pandemic. So you may know that, for example, a section of Bank Street, 2 lanes are closed, so people can actually walk over that Bank Street bridge separating the Glebe and Old Ottawa South. That was a part of a motion from Councillor Sean Menard that we worked with him and other organizations and really got a ton of support for that really quickly. And also Queen Elizabeth, which is kind of in my neighborhood in Centertown, from Laurier down to 5th Avenue. So Laurier to 5th Avenue is closed 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and I think same time on weekends. So if you haven't checked that out, it's a real game changer for people living kind of in the downtown core. So we were really proud of that moment. One of the fastest turnarounds that I've seen in a long time, where an issue begins and then council is able to act with such agility. It's sort of uncommon.
Right. Awesome. Interesting to see that. Yeah. Our next question comes from Josh Edmonston. He asks, what kind of conflict surfaces within your community and network, and how do you actually go about navigating it?
Well, first of all, it's great to see you, Josh. Josh is a friend of mine, so thanks for tuning in. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, some of the conflict that actually sometimes arises, I mean, a classic example is everybody is very nice, especially in the Ottawa scene, in the nonprofit sector, the groups we work with, and very few of us want to ever say no to people. So we always try to be collaborative. And sometimes you end up with these funny situations where you have too many chefs in the kitchen, as it were. So sometimes there's a kind of conflict of events starting get this idea and then morphing into this crazy thing. And by the end, you've got 7 speakers and the title's a paragraph, an academic paper. And you're sort of this is amazing. All these ideas are great, but how did we get here? And so perhaps that's not conflict in the strict sense, but it is trying to just have this tension of different organizations. We all have our approach, our idea of what makes a good event. We also have our own campaigns that we're trying to work on. In some cases, there's questions of branding and who's contributing funds. And so who speaks first, there's all these sort of dynamics that eventually do come out, and it's sometimes difficult to navigate them. So really, how do you navigate them? You try to speak honestly and early. That's what I would say. Oftentimes conversations can kind of get carried away and get to the point where things become established or entrenched in the group dynamic by virtue of the length of time that they've gone unchanged. And so something's brought up at the very beginning and nobody ever says anything about it. And then 3 weeks later, it's everybody's really attached to that idea. And it's too late to change it at that point. So if there's something that maybe isn't a right fit for the event, or things start changing in different directions, or for a campaign, I mean, it doesn't have to be an event, but whatever the case may be, just trying to be honest about what your needs are, what you envision for it, and trying to find a way to collaborate with that, and not being afraid to say I'm not sure if this is always the right fit, or maybe we should have different things happening here because it'll be more effective to actually reach more people this way,
Right. I think that links to you saying before that you need to go out of your comfort zone, and interacting with people, new people, is a very difficult thing, but that is something that will need to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Josh also has another question, which even I had, and I had noted that down as well. What's the impact? What's the most lasting impact that you've seen from the Council Watch program?
I think it's not to harp on this, but it's really the volunteers who have been involved with it the way that it changes their lives. I can point to policies easily. Like we could point to a lot of specific motions that have changed at the city, and they're all really important. But seeing how over 6 months someone develops from being like relatively uncomfortable talking about city council and what's a motion and what's a committee and who's the chair and why does it matter, to go to like writing up reports and taking notes and knowing all these tools that they can like research and dig up like what's really going on. Like that's so cool. And then they become an ambassador for all of us, really. They become an informed citizen. And I'm really motivated by this idea of like we have a civic duty to participate in political activity, and that our city and our lives are improved by being interested in these issues and having the tools to be able to work on them. Like that's an important part of a good life. So being able to give people the tools to do that is kind of one of the best things in the world. And it's not easy, and I think that's why it's kind of a shame that organizations kind of need to do that, because the bureaucracy is so complex that it's so hard to know what's going on normally. So that's why I'm thankful that organizations like Ecology Ottawa exist, and other groups doing similar work on different issues in different cities at different levels of government are also important, because it just makes like people, individuals, better.
Right. Awesome. That's just amazing. Yeah. So those are the
audience.
Any other questions from the audience? No, I don't think so. These are all the questions that we have for now.
Okay. So then we can move into some closing comments. It's always good to start on time and finish on time. So thanks for answering all those questions, Erik. It's always interesting. I'll ask you a question now, do our closing comments, and then leave you to finish it off, because I always like to put our speakers on the spot and ask them this question. What lasting words or thoughts would you leave? If somebody could take only one thing away from this talk, this presentation, what would you leave them with? So I'll leave that with you now for a couple minutes while I just kind of close this out. Thanks so much for giving this talk. Hearing about the surprising amount of power that municipal governments and the people who are involved in them have, and what's made ecology so prevalent in Ottawa, those 3 steps of building or finding your friends, people who share basic values with you, building your community and deepening those connections, and then finally asking them to do things and leveraging the power of that community is that advocacy piece that makes Ecology Ottawa so unique. It's really interesting to hear about, and appreciate you sharing those ideas. To people in the audience, thank you for joining us. There's a link shared earlier in the event. CEP Ottawa is doing a survey of our community to find out what it is that you would like us to do and how we could evolve our events and our engagement to continue to add value to you and to continue to help you. So please fill out that link. It's in the chat section of this video. Stay attentive to future events, both from us and from Ecology Ottawa. I'm sure we both got some things coming down the pipe, so subscribe to the newsletters and keep up to date with what's going on. Thanks for joining, and I'll leave Erik to give some closing words before closing this all off. What last piece of advice or last thought would you leave people with?
I mean, would it be cheating if I use the same quote that I opened with? Because I really feel that gets to the heart of everything that I've said, and so I'll repeat it. Never do for someone what they can do for themselves. And if you think about that, sit with it, really think about what that means and how you would change your day-to-day if you adopted that radically. It's amazing what kind of ideas you come up with, the creativity and the power of seeing somebody go from kind of taking instruction to giving instruction to becoming a leader. Really, I feel like that's so beneficial for them as individuals and for us as a collective. So of course there's maybe a couple small caveats to that, certainly still help people. It doesn't mean leave people out in their time of aid, but what it means is if they really can do it for themselves, then help them to do that. That's probably the best way to make change in most cases. And, you know, sometimes people can do amazing things and they just don't know it. And so your role is like, this is a nice way to think about it. You as an advocate, as a member of this movement, you know, you do amazing things, but you're not the hero. You're like the wise guide. You're the Yoda, if I can use a Star Wars reference. Hopefully that's not lost on anybody.
Well, if you get it, then probably the rest of the audience will. So
yeah, right. It's like your job is to inspire and to give people that advice and wisdom so that they can go do these amazing things. Like, I don't think of myself as like the hero in the story that we're telling. Like, if I did, I'd be deeply confused about what I'm doing. I actually need to be on the sidelines, hopefully in the background, and letting the individuals actually like be the heroes, like the volunteers, the people who are new and full of energy and passion. I want to just give them all the skills as soon as possible, give them the tools, let them use our lists, let them use our database, help them, you know, make their campaigns successful. And that's sort of the best case scenario. So instead of somebody coming to us with an idea and saying, oh, hey, like, I want to protect this green space, what can you do about it? What can you, Ecology Ottawa, do? I would say, what would you like to do about it? How can I help you do that? So never do for someone else what they can do for themselves.
Wise words on that. Well, thank you again, Erik. Thank you to you and Ecology Ottawa and all the work that you do. Thank you to the team at CEP for putting this event together. And I look forward to seeing you again and everybody in the audience at our next event and in person when we're allowed to do that. So thanks so much and have a nice night.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming, and thanks Lucas and CEP Ottawa and Canada for hosting us. It's been really great.